Okay. Today we're going to be talking about marijuana, and I am Cheryl DePaolo, the director of the Ulster Prevention Council. And I realized after I started putting this together that 1 hour is not nearly long enough to cover all of the topics that we could talk about regarding marijuana. So this is a real quick overview of many, many different topics that are involved when we talk about marijuana. And I'm trying out some new software today that I use in my classroom and in college classes, and my students really enjoy it. So I thought we would try it out today. It's called Poll Everywhere. And if you look in the chat, you'll see the link to Poll Everywhere, pollev.com/Cheryl DePaul 243. Or you can use your cell phone and just text that Cheryl DePaul 243 to 37607 to join, and then you can text, and you only need to join once, and then you can answer any of the polls. So this is anonymous software. If you go to that Poll Ev link, you'll see an option to put a screen name. Just choose to be anonymous, and I think that's really helpful with the polls. And you'll see that we have a question in the poll that is one word that describes how I feel about marijuana. And we're going to kind of make a word cloud with this. So you can add to this as we go on, or you can put words in now or put them at the end. The poll link is in the chat. I can repeat it. Let's see. Let's just put it back in the chat again. Send to everyone. It's also, let's see, I do have, let's see if I can find I have it on a slide. So that you can see where the poll software, do you have that link now? And you can do it either on your computer or on your phone to join, and that poll is active right now. Okay, so we're going to start talking about marijuana, and you can just kind of pop words into that poll whenever you are having a feeling or a thought about it, and we'll see what we come up with in the end. And we will be covering quite a broad range of topics, so we're going to jump right in. So I want to talk a little bit about where I'm coming from in this presentation, because this is such a broad topic that I'm going to come at it from a prevention lens. And a prevention lens means that we're mostly looking at how do we help youth and help everyone in general in preventing substance use disorders and some of the adverse consequences of use. So I'm always looking at it kind of with that lens. So you may have a different lens than I do. That's okay, but I want you to know that that's kind of where I'm coming from. I know that some of these topics can be controversial. There are many different angles and opinions, and that means that probably we have many more webinars ahead to cover these different topics, but I want to give you a real quick overview. So when we talk about marijuana, we're really talking about cannabis, and there are so many different ways that it's used today. So when I think about it, and in my teen years, basically what was used was joints. Joints were rolled with cannabis and maybe bongs, and that was about it back then. That's a long time ago. And the cannabis that was used then was also very, very mild in terms of the amount of THC involved compared to the products that are available today. So we'll be talking about some of these. So we've talked in the substance use disorders webinar, and just a real quick overview of the brain chemistry. So what happens with these substances that we use is that they basically kind of hijack our brain neurotransmitter system. And so for a lot of drugs of abuse, serotonin is involved and dopamine. In terms of THC, which is the main psychoactive ingredient in cannabis, it's the endocannabinoid system. And so the brain has this chemical called anandamide, and you can see the chemical structure there, and then the chemical structure next to it of THC. And so you can see how closely it is in shape to link into those transmitter sites and kind of hijack the endocannabinoid system. So we're not going to talk too much more about brain chemistry in terms of how the neurotransmitters work, but we want to take a look at the areas of the brain that THC affects. And here's a little kind of Quizlet for you. Which areas of the brain does THC affect? We have all these different areas that can be impacted: movement, the sensory, judgment, reward, memory, coordination, vision. And if you want to just post in the chat which of these you think is affected by THC, which is the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. So if we take a look at kind of a graphic of where THC kind of travels to in the brain, we're going to see that almost all of those areas are involved. I'm going to just flip back to the prior slide that shows the different areas of the brain. If we flip back to the THC slide, one area that's not impacted so much is vision. See that back kind of purple area that's in the back, the occipital lobe. But all of these others and more are impacted. And so the one that is really dark purple in here, where the big concentration of THC resides, is in the pleasure center. That's that kind of darker purple line there. So when we talk about brain maturation, from the ages of 12 to 25, I'm going to talk about just two areas. One that's highly active in adolescence. This area is developing the nucleus accumbens, which is the pleasure center of the brain, and it's active during pleasurable activities like eating, sex, and drug use. So it plays a major role. And then in the prefrontal cortex, which is really the very front of your brain right behind your forehead, matures in late adolescence or early adulthood. Impulse control, decision making, organizing and planning, abstract thought, rational thinking, attention, focus, working memory. If we think about which of these we would kind of be, willing to give up in terms of our own brains functioning, not so many. These are all pretty much crucial to our functioning, and these are all areas that are affected by THC. So the intoxication effects of THC, and we're pretty familiar with this. There's no big surprises here, but a sense of euphoria, a sense of calmness. It can suppress the appetite, or not suppress, we all know that differently. Appetite stimulation, increase the appetite, altered perceptions of time, impairments of coordination and balance, increased heart rate, acute psychosis, panic, or anxiety, and short-term memory dysfunction. So some of the signs of use for marijuana include red eyes, poor muscle coordination, that increased appetite, delayed reaction times, and also a distinctive smell, sometimes described as a skunk-like smell. I've been driving past the hemp fields here in Dutchess County on Knoxon Road and getting that very distinctive skunk smell in that huge new hemp field which doesn't even have a high THC concentrate. It's used for industrial purposes. One of the things that we're going to note when we talk about new ways of using is that we're not going to have so much of that smell and maybe not even so much of the red eyes as signs of use. One of the things that we know about cannabis is that about 1 in 11 people who use it will get addicted. And so there is a cannabis use disorder in the DSM-5, and that means that most people that use are not going to become addicted, right? So we're not saying that everybody that uses does become addicted, but about 1 in 11 people who use do become addicted. And because of that brain development process that's taking place, about 1 in 6 people who start using the drug before the age of 18 can become addicted. So we're very concerned about what's going on in terms of brain development and especially in terms of youth use. When we look at Americans with substance use disorders by their primary drug of choice, it's interesting to see that 64.5% alcohol is the primary drug of choice, but for 15.7 people, that greenish triangle piece of the pie, it is cannabis. And this is also true in terms of treatment admissions. So people who are looking for help in their substance use disorder, about 15% of admissions are primarily for cannabis. And then it's also a secondary drug with another drug primary for more participants than that. One of the things that's of concern to us is that marijuana has surpassed daily marijuana use has surpassed near daily cigarette use. In 2015, we can see in this graph the crossover between cigarettes, which continues a downward trend, and marijuana use, which is on an upward trend. And so more people are smoking marijuana at this point than are smoking cigarettes. Marijuana has some pretty significant studies that show links to mental health issues. And there's a particular study out of New Zealand and then some more follow-up studies that was a longitudinal study, which means it goes on for a long time. They follow the same people over a decade. So it takes many, many researchers over time to participate in the study. And it found that marijuana can cause permanent IQ loss of as much as 8 points when people start using it at a young age. These IQ points don't come back even after quitting marijuana. So 8 IQ points is quite a bit. It might not sound like a lot, but it's almost the difference between being average and below average or average and above average. 8 points is actually quite a bit. And studies also link marijuana use to schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, suicide planning, and psychotic episodes. It's not known if marijuana use is the cause of these conditions. So we have studies that show a link, right? They're correlational. They show a correlation between one thing and another. But they don't necessarily always show causation. It's very difficult to show that one thing caused another thing. So for instance, cigarette use and lung cancer are correlated, and we think it's a causal factor, but we don't always know if it's the cause of every single individual case. So we have some concerns in mental health, and particularly that link to schizophrenia seems to be of concern, and especially because that is a disorder that also develops in late adolescence and early adulthood. I want to talk about some of the newer cannabis products. So we're not going to look much at blunts and bongs and joints, but some new cannabis products that are some of these things that you see here. And these are all very high content THC products. And here are some versions of it: shatter, wax, crumble, butter, oil. There are many, many different forms and names for these products that are mainly used with butane hash oil. They're made with different processes to produce the product, but basically they're all very high content THC. Some names for it: wax, honey, weed oil, butane hash oil, or BHO. And these have a very, very high concentration of THC, much, much more than we're used to seeing with joints and blunts and bongs. And so these substances are of great concern. And they're also, I have to tell you, of tremendous interest to youth who are kind of fascinated with all of the different kinds of products and the ways that these can be used. And some of us who are a little bit older will remember hash being a thing. So this is kind of the equivalent. It's a product of hash that these products are developed from, but they're made in different ways. The process for making some of these products can be very dangerous. They can involve using butane to light the product. The thing that you'll see on the far right that kind of looks like it's on a nail is actually on a nail. It's called a dab. And if you've heard of a dab and the dab dance, a dab is a very small amount of this kind of gooey substance that is then heated and the vapor is inhaled, and that's a dab. The one on the lower right is called shatter, and you can tell by looking at it why it's called shatter. It looks kind of like, I don't know, peanut butter brittle or broken glass, and it's kind of can be like a lollipop or a hard candy, and it's very easy to use this even say in the classroom or sitting on the couch next to your mom. A very high THC product that you wouldn't necessarily have the smelly clothing and so forth that would give off signs of use. So it's very easy to use these products in a much more hidden way. Also with a vape device, which we'll talk about. In the process of making this, there have been some explosions because butane is involved in the process. There are some other methods, dry ice extraction, that are not so dangerous, but there are some known dangers because things can ignite very quickly during some of these processes, especially if you're getting your directions off the internet and not really, knowing what you're doing. Vaping THC has become quite popular. So we're familiar with vaping. There is a webinar around vaping and e-cigarettes that I would encourage you to look at. All of these different devices can be used for vaping THC. Anything that can be used for nicotine can also, or for vape juice, can also be used with a THC product. On the far right, you'll see kind of a larger, what's called the modification, which is typically what's used. And you'll see on the bottom that you kind of can develop big clouds of vapor when you're smoking these. And one of the important things to know about vaping is that it's not really vapor that's involved at all. It is an aerosol. And the difference is that an aerosol means that there are metal fragments in this mist. Vapor sounds like steam or water. It's harmless. This is not in any way harmless. We're finding out that there are more and more dangers to vaping than we even thought in the beginning. Clouding also is kind of a competitive sport. So there are gatherings to see who can make, different shapes of clouds, the biggest cloud. And so that's kind of a source of entertainment and using the vape THC. One of the things that we see that's of concern is that vaping among high school students and even middle school students is increasing over time. So we see that 8th graders use has increased from, this is just over 2017 to 2018 to 2019, in a national study called Monitoring the Future, and we compare our local data to this national data, but the use is definitely increasing each year at a tremendous amount. and this is in particular is cannabis vaping. And so we see this steady increase. When we do our Ulster County Youth Development Survey, hopefully later this year, we got kind of stalled out by the pandemic, but we will see, I think that our rates are even higher than the national averages, and this is of concern. In the webinar on vaping, Caitlin Shea discussed a valley, and I just want to mention it. It's e-cigarette or vaping use associated lung injury. And this is particularly related to vaping. There have been over 2,800 hospitalizations or deaths, 68 confirmed deaths related to this. And what's really frightening about this is that this can be young people who have vaped very little. You know, these are not long-term chronic vapors developing something. These are younger people who may have used not for a very long time. It seems to be linked to vitamin E acetate, which is used to process the THC oil. And it also seems to be linked to black market THC juice. So not what you would get in a medical marijuana dispensary. It seems to be linked to the process that's used more on the black market. Another illness associated with vaping is popcorn lung. And it's called popcorn lung because it developed, first of all, was noticed in a factory where popcorn was processed. And it seems to be related to diacetyl, which is used in flavoring. And this is true for vaping nicotine and vape juice as well as THC or CBD products, where there's scarring in the lungs, and this can occur without a tremendous long history of vaping as well. So these two disorders in particular are associated with vaping. Another item of concern is marijuana edibles. So when I was growing up, I do remember there were pot brownies. People would make things, hash brownies, you know, maybe some cookies, a couple of different things that maybe THC was put in. But now there are all of these different products that, and we're going to talk about the commercialization of marijuana in states where it's legal. All of these are different things that are available legally in states that have commercialized marijuana. And these become things that are very much of interest to younger people. You can kind of see by the cartoon characters and the funny names that they are appealing to youth and younger people. Very sweet kind of soda drinks, candy, cookies, you know, ice cream, gummy bears. And so these are of concern, particularly because a dose of an edible with cannabis is a very small dose. It could be a little corner of a chocolate bar or a quarter of a cookie. And we don't usually eat a quarter of a cookie, do we? You know, we maybe a cookie and maybe more. And so it's very easy to ingest more than expected and more than is going to give just the effect that one desires. And so these edibles are of great concern, especially if we talk about commercializing marijuana, which we'll do in just a little bit. We're going to look at a map of states that have enacted various laws, but I just want to take a look at this slide from our last youth survey in Ulster County. And one of the things that we look at as prevention educators is the perception of risk of marijuana among students. And so we'll see from the far yellow bar is going to be 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. And then the red bar is overall of students reporting that the drug is a moderate risk or a great risk. And we'll see that for alcohol, It remains steady. Around 75% of students think that alcohol is a risk to them. We wish that more students thought it was a risk, but it remains steady. And for cigarettes, the rate goes up. As students get older, they recognize the risk of cigarette smoking. They've pretty much gotten that message fairly loud and clear, and the rates stay high. But when we look at marijuana, we look at this whole different picture in that in our seventh graders, about 64% felt that marijuana was harmful. And by 12th grade, it was like 20%. So the rate drops tremendously through the middle school and high school career to very few seniors feeling that marijuana is a risk. And I think that one of the reasons for this is that we're unclear. As adults, we're kind of ambivalent. We're unsure of how we feel about how harmful marijuana might be. We get so many different mixed messages, and there's so much information out there that the perception of risk is really very low. So one of the really important messages of Ulster Prevention Council and prevention in general is the risk of marijuana to young people, and that's up to the age of about 25 while the brain is still developing. So it goes through to the college years and young adult years. Someone doesn't necessarily go to college while the brain is still developing. So I want to talk about what is perhaps the biggest issue in discussing marijuana right now, other than those concentrates and dabs, which is a tremendous new issue, is that there's the issue of legalization, commercialization, etc. So I want to just talk about this issue for a couple of minutes. And remember, I'm using a prevention lens. So people have a lot of different views about legalization. There's a big push in New York State to legalize right now. And that also got stalled by the pandemic. Something would have happened by now, I think, if the governor and Department of Health and the legislature had not had their attention diverted by the pandemic. So I want to look at this, what we see in the prevention field as a false dichotomy that our choices are either legalization or incarceration. So you will hear about social justice issues. We're all interested in social justice right now, and that we know that there are a disproportionate number of minority, especially young men of color, who are in jail, and how many of them are drug-related offenses. And so we feel that legalizing would kind of help to repair some of that damage that's been done. And in looking at the history of marijuana, it's really interesting to look at. We have these two drugs that are legal, right? Cigarettes and alcohol, that do a tremendous amount of damage and are legal. And then we have marijuana, and it's illegal. And so I'll hear a lot, well, it's safer and better than alcohol or cigarettes. I don't really see that as a great argument because, yeah, alcohol and cigarettes both do a tremendous amount of damage, and it's an issue of, do we really need a third legal drug that causes damage? Although probably not so much. But I want to have you look at it in a slightly different way. So there are really three separate issues that often get conflated or mixed up. And so this is the way that we look at it in prevention and what some of the options are. So there's penalizing drug users versus decriminalization. So we have people who have been incarcerated for long periods of time for very small drug charges, possession, in disproportionate rates of minorities because there has not been bail, so people remain in jail because they can't make bail. And so we know that this is an issue in terms of social justice that we need to take a look at. The second issue is medicinal use of compounds derived from marijuana. We'll take a look at that in a minute in terms of what's going on in New York with medical marijuana and what the program is. And so I go to hearings sometimes that are about the legalization, pros and cons and governor's hearings, and people talk about medical use, and really that's already something that is legal. Some people want it to be expanded or different than it is, but nevertheless, we do have that in place right now. And then the third option of legalization of marijuana for non-medical use. And this would be strictly for adults. Nobody is really talking, I don't think, about legalizing it for youth use. But in looking at commercialized legalization so that it's legal to sell and have stores and so forth. So let's look at decriminalization in New York and what we have now. And this is fairly new. It's a 2019 law that decriminalized marijuana in New York State, so that possession of 2 ounces or less is now a violation. There is a fine of about $50 for 1 ounce, $100 for 2 ounces. So if you're not familiar with drugs and weights and so forth, an ounce is about enough for 60 joints. 2 ounces, about 120 joints. Not that everybody is smoking little tiny joints anymore, but it is kind of a largish amount for personal use that has those fines. That's a violation. And convictions that are classified as non-criminal are vacated and dismissed. So this expungement of records applies both retroactively and for future convictions. So these small possession charges are expunged. And this is huge in terms of social justice, because those people who have been incarcerated or charged and convicted with minor marijuana crimes can have clear records, which is very important to, for instance, employment. So this was an important part of decriminalizing. The bill doesn't change the charges or penalties for possession of larger amounts than 2 ounces, and it doesn't legalize or decriminalize marijuana dealing or sales. So it's still illegal to deal or sell marijuana in New York State. We'll come back to what it would look like to legalize, but we're going to talk for a couple of minutes about medical marijuana. So we have this issue in terms of whether marijuana is medicine, and we really need to look at this in a couple of ways. In cannabis, in the plant, there are at least 85 active cannabinoids. And you'll recall that I talked about THC and THC's effects and how much is in some of these products that are available now. That's just one of the active cannabinoids. It's the one that we're most concerned about. But there are many, many others, including CBD. And CBD is... Did I lose my audio? Can you hear me? My microphone. Okay. Sorry, my microphone looked like it wasn't working there for a little bit. So I want to talk about CBD, and there are 3 FDA-approved products now that are legal in the United States. Are you able to hear? On my end, the microphone is lit up. I just unmuted. Okay, can you hear now? Okay, okay. Thank you. I'm not sure why that happened. Just technical glitching. All right. So CBD. So CBD is one of the other active cannabinoids. There are others, but there are 3 FDA-approved products. So it's not true that there are no legal medicines from cannabis. Dronabinol or Marinol, Syndrose, which is dronabinol in a liquid form, and Nabilone or Sesamet. And these are approved for helping certain conditions, including glaucoma and including appetite and seizures and a couple of other uses. There's also a sublingual spray called Sativex that is legal in other countries but is not used in the US quite yet. But this is important because some people aren't able to swallow pills, and so the liquid or the sublingual spray for someone who has a very, end stage cancer or something like that, it's important for them to be able to use. So the marijuana program in New York is interesting, and one of the things that's interesting about medical marijuana to me is that all of our other medications across the country are approved by the FDA. They go through an FDA process, lots and lots of research is done, and then they're approved for use as safe for humans. That's not what happened with medical marijuana. Medical marijuana was passed by legislatures. In some states, it was voted in by the voters. And so it's really interesting that instead of doctors making our decisions about what's medical, now we have legislators and voters making that decision. And so it's a really unusual circumstance. In New York, it's considered kind of a limited use that is looser in some other states, but you need to have one of these specific serious conditions to qualify, such as cancer, HIV, Lou Gehrig's disease, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, inflammatory bowel disease, neuropathies, Huntington's, damage to the nervous tissue of the spinal cord, and lately, PTSD, chronic pain, and opiate use disorder have been added. Other conditions can be added by the Commissioner of the Department of Health of New York, and the person needs to be in medical treatment and likely to receive therapeutic benefit from the substance. It's interesting that the legislature circumvented the Department of Health by passing bills to add PTSD and chronic pain. They weren't originally included, and there was a big veterans lobby that was involved. There isn't really good evidence that it's helpful for those conditions, but nevertheless. And generally, the products that are dispensed in the local dispensaries, and by the way, between Westchester and Albany, there are only 2. One is located in Newburgh, and it's called Curaleaf, and there's another one in Ulster County called Etain. And the products that they dispense are basically oils and tinctures that can be used that have some kind of a mix between high THC, low CBD, an equal amount of THC and CBD, or high CBD, low THC. That's kind of oversimplifying it, but that's generally what's available there. In New York, smoking marijuana as a method of consumption is specifically excluded from certified medical use, and that's because we know that the smoking of anything is harmful to the lungs. So that's not considered a legally medically dispensed form of marijuana. Now, some patients will argue that they get a different effect and a better effect from smoking than they do from the oils or tinctures or things that are dispensed. Here's a map, and this I think is accurate as of today. It's the most up-to-date one that I can find that looks at the legal status in the United States for these various laws. So the darker green are the states that have commercialized marijuana. We're going to look at commercialization in just a minute. So you can walk into a store, for instance, and buy marijuana in these states. We have states in light green that have medical marijuana, and they don't have commercialized marijuana. And then the states with the light and dark green stripes are states that are expected to maybe go fully legal, that are working on it. And New York is looking like one of those states. We look pretty close to maybe reaching commercialization of marijuana. And then you can see the yellow or orange school busy color states that where THC is still illegal. And so that's what is kind of breaking out like in the country. And what we have is a lot of information regarding what's going on in states that have gone fully legal. And I want to talk about that for just a couple of minutes. And remember, I'm using a prevention lens, so I'm looking at the effect on youth. But when we look at commercialization and what that looks like in many states, such as in California and in Washington and Colorado, is that there are storefronts where you can go in and you can purchase your products. And these are companies that produce products that are huge conglomerates, equivalent to big tobacco. And some of the big tobacco companies are investing in marijuana for commercialization. Even the small company that owns the medical dispensary in Kingston is related to a big conglomerate that sells commercialized marijuana in other states. And so they're kind of poised to move in if we commercialize, so that we have these open stores. You can see here a guy kind of out on the street advertising $10 grams. They would have those edible products and so forth. And even as close as Massachusetts, you can find this. You can go to Massachusetts and see these, same type of things. And so I want to talk about the effect on youth and social costs of commercialization that are of concern. And so one of the things that prevention providers are asking New York to do is just to take a look further at these issues before they decide to fully commercialize, because we have some concerns. One is that youth use in legal versus non-legal states has increased. In both ages 12 to 17 and ages 18 to 25, both past year youth, past month youth is much higher in states that have legalized these products than it is in states that haven't, even though it's not legal for minors to purchase the product. The use is much higher. So we have concerns there. Another concern is revenue versus cost. So one of the big pushes to commercialize, and in New York I hear this a lot, is about the revenue that can be generated and what we could do with the revenue, and how great this would be for the states. Well, what we've seen in other states is that there are social costs that really make it very difficult to say that that commercializing has really helped the state tremendously in terms of what they're going to make. So here's an estimate for Connecticut that looked at the cost of commercializing versus the revenues. And there's a high estimate for revenue, a low estimate for revenue. And then the cost of all of these other issues. The first one being basic administrative overhead, of oversight of the commercialization. Drug driving fatalities have increased in states that legalize. It's still not legal to be under the influence and drive, and yet fatalities have increased And one of the issues, by the way, related to that and to drug driving, non-fatal injuries, damaged vehicles, and drug driving, is that marijuana is very difficult. You know, if you're drunk, they can measure the amount of alcohol in your system and determine your impairment on the scene or with a test later on. That's very difficult to do with THC because it accumulates in the body. It doesn't come into your system and leave your system quickly like alcohol does. It stays in the system. And so someone who's a chronic user will maintain high levels of THC in their system, even if they haven't particularly used, you know, that day that they got behind the wheel. So it's a real problem for law enforcement in terms of determining drug driving. Medical costs in extraction labs. There's a little cost there for homelessness that's factored in. Absenteeism, you can see a huge cost, and also workplace injuries. So this estimate in Connecticut looked at, for every dollar received in tax revenue from legal drug cost society, cost society more than $10 in lost social costs due to workplace, highway, health, criminal justice, and other reasons that some of them aren't represented here. Just a little bit more about tax revenue. Here you can look at different states and the percent of the budget that they're receiving in these states that have fully commercialized. So Colorado, we hear an awful lot about, huge in Colorado, still less than 1%, and then Nevada, 0.04% of the budget. So not a lot of tax revenue. Colorado estimates $4.50 is the cost for each dollar brought in by tax revenue. And there's a quote there from the marijuana coordination director in Colorado. You do not legalize for taxation. It's a myth. You're not going to pave streets. You're not going to pay teachers. The big red herring is the whole thing that the tax revenue will solve a bunch of crises, but it won't. And there's also a video clip that I'll put on the site that is from a former mayor of Denver talking about regrets in terms of having gone this way and what's happened in Colorado. Also, in looking at social injustice, so one of the things we talked about in terms of decriminalization is disproportionate arrests and the effect on minority communities. On the far left, you'll see that disproportionate arrests are still happening, and this is Colorado Department of Public Safety. The rate of Black arrests in 2017 was still nearly 2 times that of whites for marijuana-related arrests. That the shops were located more densely in poor neighborhoods of color, and you can see a map. You can't see a lot of detail there, but it shows the density of the pot shops. So communities are able in most states to opt out if they don't want to have commercialization, and it's more likely to be affluent communities that opt out of having the shops in their communities. There's some mixed data regarding whether crime goes up or down in neighborhoods that have commercialization. And there are also some disturbing stats correlated with the fact that in nearly every state that is legalized, the overall prison population has either stayed stable or, as in some states like Colorado and Washington, D.C., rose sharply after legalization following years of decline. So the social justice issue doesn't seem to be addressed in the way that we had hoped. So Dr. Nora Volkow in the New England Journal of Medicine, and she's probably our most eminent, respected doctor in this country in terms of substance use issues, really summarized this, I think, in a good way in saying that repeated marijuana use during adolescence may result in long-lasting changes in brain function that can jeopardize educational, professional, and social achievements. However, the effects of a drug, legal or illegal, on individual health are determined not only by its pharmacologic properties, but also by its availability and social acceptability. In this respect, legal drugs, alcohol and tobacco, offer a sobering perspective, accounting for the greatest burden of disease associated with drugs, not because they are more dangerous than illegal drugs, but because their legal status allows for more widespread exposure. So I want to talk a little bit about poll, and I was going to do this poll, but we have a low number, and with a low number of people, it tends not to be as anonymous. So I don't want to put you on the spot here, but in looking at whether or not you think marijuana should be made legal for adults, in an Emerson poll, and this is in New York State, poll of 600 people in 2017, 60% of people said yes, that marijuana should be made legal for adults age 21 or older. And then when they were polled, knowing that personal marijuana possession is already decriminalized and medicalized in New York, which one of the following marijuana policies do you prefer? That rate went down to 40% when people knew that decriminalization and medicalization were really separate issues to commercialized legalization. So in our last couple of minutes, I just want to talk a little bit about what we can do as adults in working with youth, what parents and adults can do. So start talking early. Teens who use marijuana often start by age 14. So by the time we think we should get around to having that talk, it may be too late. So it's important to have these conversations with youth. And I think it's very important for us to be really clear in our own minds about what the issues are related to youth, because our ambivalence is reflected in their kind of approval rates and perception of harm with marijuana, so that we need to be really clear on what the issues are and be honest about what the potential benefits may be. There is some research showing that CBD and maybe some of the other cannabinoids are extremely helpful for certain conditions, and it's important to be honest about that and not demonize something that they're going to look and see that maybe we haven't given them all of the information. Setting clear, specific rules around marijuana and discussing the expectations often. So one of the things that we know is that youth are greatly impacted by their parents' opinions and expectations regarding drinking and use. And it does matter to them what we think and what we say to them about it, and also the consequences. Be open and honest about the risks of use and why you want them to help them stay healthy. Role play to help teens practice saying no to drugs. We joke about just say no, but in our classroom prevention programs, we talk about all the different ways that you can say no. I've got something else to do, not right now, all different ways to, to say no when they're put on the spot, because adults tend to not be able to come up with ways to say no. And interesting research shows that the larger the peer group is around them, the more likely they are to go along. And so it's important to give them options in terms of being able to say no. And also reinforcing the idea that not everyone their age is using. Most teens don't use marijuana at all. As a matter of fact, it's about 15%, which is way too high. However, if we look at the fact that 85 out of 100 teens are not using, you're in the vast majority if you don't use, and that's really important for youth to know. Sometimes you'd like to be the outliers and the ones who are doing something that not everybody else is doing, but most teens kind of want to know what their peers are doing, and they have the impression that many, many more are using than is actually the case. So it's really important to reinforce the idea that not everyone uses. And so we've reached 1 o'clock. Here's my contact information for further reference. I do want to just go over to our poll and show you the responses. We didn't get a lot here, but we got positively and ambivalent about marijuana here. And I'm going to post the poll on our website so that we can get more answers to that question. I hope that you will contact me for further information and reflect back on the information so that we can help our youth to remain healthy. Thanks so much. I hope that you'll join us again on Wednesday at noon for the next educational expedition presentation.